Thank you, Mr Speaker. I stand to speak on behalf of the Green Party on the latest round of preferential trade agreements which Labor and National have been signing us up to. This is actually not a free trade agreement, as the previous speaker and other speakers have said. It's actually a preferential trade agreement. That is, it's a preferential trade agreement between two countries, or rather in the case of Hong Kong, a kind of subset of a country. So this is a preferential trade agreement, and like all of the preferential trade agreements that have been signed up by Labor and National, it has some real problems for New Zealand. I want to talk in general terms about some of the problems with these preferential trade agreements, and then specifically talk about why signing a trade agreement with the Chinese Communist Party is a particularly stupid thing to do, as if all the others weren't stupid enough. One of the issues with these preferential trade agreements is, of course, the investment clauses within them. In this particular preferential trade agreement with Hong Kong, the investment clauses are to be negotiated by an exchange of letters rather than be included in the agreement itself. But I think the best way to understand the kind of framework within which this agreement is operating is to look at the parallel agreement which is between China and New Zealand, which is the parallel agreement that goes alongside of this. Chapter 11 of the New Zealand-China Preferential Trade Agreement looks at the issues around investment clauses. And basically what it says is that investments into each country have to be treated, they have to be given national treatment. That is that under Article 138, we need to treat Chinese investors in New Zealand the same as we treat New Zealand investors in New Zealand, except for where we have non-conforming articles, as they're called. Now, non-conforming measures under Article 141 of the China-New Zealand Free Trade Agreement, which is the parallel agreement to this one, Article 141 addresses non-conforming measures. And basically, as is the case with most of these preferential trade agreements, it operates as a ratchet. What it says is whatever non-conforming measures you had on investment at the time that the treaty was signed, you can keep them, but you can't make them any tighter, but you can weaken them. So our overseas investment laws, as they currently exist, which place certain constraints on incoming investment from foreign countries, those laws can remain in place, but they can't be tightened. They can be weakened, so it acts as a ratchet. So the overseas investment laws as they currently stand, whether they're to do with sensitive land, that is like rural land over 5 hectares, or whether it's business investment over $100 million, those laws can be weakened, as if they're not weak enough already, but they can't be strengthened. And so what these trade deals try to lock in place is they try to freeze the existing overseas investment laws in place, and they say you can weaken those laws further, but you can't strengthen them. And so Labor and National are signing up to what really should be called sell the family farm trade agreements, because that's what they're designed to do. And the way that these agreements are negotiated says that the current investment laws we have cannot be strengthened. So we know under the current investment laws that we've sold off around maybe 150,000 hectares of farmland into foreign ownership over the last 5 years, though the figures on it are a little bit unclear because it's not all recorded. And so under Labor's watch we were sold large chunks of the country into foreign ownership. And what these agreements do is say you can't tighten the laws any further. So the laws that are currently in place, which are enabling very large amounts of New Zealand land to be sold into overseas ownership, they can't be tightened. That is exactly what's explicitly stated in these agreements. Now, in the Hong Kong agreement, this is to be done by an exchange of letters, which operates in parallel with the agreement and is currently being negotiated. In the Chinese agreement with the Chinese Communist Party, that's in Chapter 11, and I would invite people to have a serious look at Chapter 11 of the New Zealand-China Free Trade Agreement, or Preferential Trade Agreement as it actually is, and you will see there the provisions that prevent us from exercising our democratic rights as a sovereign parliament to change the rules around foreign investment. So if this parliament were to decide, goodness knows it would take quite some doing, but if this parliament were to find the courage within itself to strengthen the rules around overseas investment to stop family farms being sold off, because of course this parliament has overseen a massive sell-off in family farms and is planning to continue that. But goodness me, if this parliament were to find the moral courage to say we don't want all of our family farms to go into overseas ownership, whether it's Hong Kong, China or any other country, then we would find ourselves in breach of these investment treaties that Labor and National are so intent on signing the government up to. Because under Article 141 of the New Zealand-China Free Trade Deal, which will be paralleled by the exchange of letters in the Hong Kong deal, it says that that the national treatment doesn't apply to any existing non-conforming measure. Our overseas investment laws are a non-conforming measure. And it says that you can continue with that, but it says that you cannot increase the non-conformity of the measure. Under Article 141(3), it says very clearly in the New Zealand-China Free Trade Agreement, which will be paralleled in the Hong Kong Agreement, it says that you cannot increase the non-conformity of these measures. So that means that if you want to increase the restrictions on foreign ownership of New Zealand land, then you will be breaching the agreements that National and Labor are so intent on signing us up to. Over and over and over again, National and Labor are tying us into that situation. Now, with China and Hong Kong, of course, that means making a deal with the Chinese Communist Party, an authoritarian capitalist regime that imprisons people that disagree with it, that locks them up if they don't agree with it. And that's the deal that we've signed in this particular case with the Chinese Communist Party. The Chinese Communist Party, of course, is a one-party state that controls the Chinese government. Hu Jintao, of course, isn't President of China because he was elected there. He's President of China because he's Secretary-General of the Chinese Communist Party. It is, of course, the Chinese Communist Party that appoints the President of China. So by signing up to these agreements, we have locked in place the current overseas investment regime. So if we want to tighten the overseas investment regime, we would be breaching the terms of the agreements that Labor and National have locked us into. Now, we've heard a lot from Labor and National recently about somehow they've suddenly decided they don't like the sale of the family farm to foreign owners, even though they've been overseeing it for a very long time, particularly Labor, as the last government were very keen on selling off the family farm. That's why they sold literally hundreds of thousands of hectares into overseas ownership. And so they've locked us into an agreement which means that we can't tighten the rules on overseas investment because Chapter 11 of the New Zealand-China Free Trade Agreement, paralleled by the exchange of letters that's to come in the Hong Kong Free Trade Agreement, says that you can have measures which treat overseas investors differently, like our overseas investment laws. You can have them as they are now, but you can't tighten them. You can weaken them, but you can't tighten them. So if we decided that we didn't want any further family farms, anything over, say, 5 hectares, to go into overseas ownership, we would be breaching the terms of the New Zealand-China Free Trade Agreement and no doubt the terms that will be in the exchange of letters with the Hong Kong-New Zealand Free Trade Agreement. So when National and Labor sit in this House, as they do day after day, and pretend that they're worried about the sale of foreign land, you have to wonder, why are they signing us up to agreements that lock in the current rules that enable the sale of land to foreign owners? I think that's really something which is unexamined, because what happens with these debates about free trade agreements is that anything called an FTA, a free trade agreement, immediately gets support of National and Labor. They just vote for it. They just kind of like have a reflex reaction. If it's called a free trade agreement, they vote for it. They don't think about it. They don't read the treaties. They don't read Chapter 11, for example, of the treaty, which covers all the investment clauses. They go, free trade agreements, oh, you must vote for them, regardless of the fact that they are constraining the ability of this parliament and future parliaments to regulate in the democratic interests of people in this country. So if we democratically decided we wanted to tighten overseas investment laws beyond those that currently exist, we would be breaching Chapter 11 of the New Zealand-China Free Trade Agreement and no doubt the exchange of letters with the Hong Kong-New Zealand Free Trade Agreement. And so that's why the Green Party won't be voting for this, because unlike National Labor, we're not happy with the sale of New Zealand land completely unregulated, and we think we need to tighten the laws around investment in New Zealand in order to do what's in the best interest of this country, rather than being bound up by some kind of ideological position in favour of anything called the Free Trade Agreement, whatever is the content of that agreement.
Jackie.